They never thought you'd actually do it. They thought you'd stay, tolerate, bend, break. But when you finally walked away, something in them shattered, not because you left, but because now they had to face the truth without you to shield them from it. You don't realize the impact you have on people until you leave, until your absence echoes louder than your presence ever did. And when you finally choose yourself, when you really walk away, it sets off a chain reaction that forces everyone around you to confront the things they've been avoiding. Because now the buffer is gone. The mirror has vanished. The silence gets louder. And what they feel is everything you used to carry for them. You see, walking away is not just a physical act. It's psychological, emotional, spiritual. It's a declaration. It says, I'm no longer available for your projections. I will not be the container for your chaos. I refuse to keep betraying myself just to keep the peace. And people feel that deeply, even if they don't say it, even if they never admit it, especially when they didn't see it coming. Because until that moment, they believed in the illusion of your permanence. They thought you'd always be the one who understands, the one who forgives, the one who makes room. But you stopped making room for what was shrinking you. You finally saw that love without respect is erosion. That loyalty without reciprocity is self-abandonment. And when you walked away, they were forced to sit with all the parts of themselves you've been soothing. Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And that's exactly what your presence protected them from. But once you're gone, that protection disappears. Now they have to feel, to reflect, to sit in the discomfort they kept outsourcing to you. And here's what happens. At first, they get angry. They call you selfish, cold, dramatic. It's easier to demonize you than to look at themselves. Because if they admitted the truth, that you left because you were exhausted, disrespected, taken for granted, they'd have to change. And most people would rather stay comfortable in dysfunction than face that level of accountability. So they lash out. But underneath that anger is fear. Fear of their own emptiness, fear of the silence you leave behind. Fear that they'll never find someone who holds space like you did, someone who sees through the noise, touches the wound, and stays. But they taught you how to leave. Not with their words, with their actions, with every time they dismissed your feelings, every time they laughed off your boundaries, every time they made you feel like you were too much or not enough. So you chose yourself. And in doing so, you disrupted the entire dynamic. Because now there's no one left to play the role you outgrew. People don't always miss you. They miss who they were when they had access to your energy. They miss the convenience of you, the version of you who overextended, overgave, and quietly suffered. But that version is gone. And in its place stands someone new. Someone who knows their worth. Someone who's not afraid of solitude. Someone who understands that walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires separation. It requires you to leave behind what no longer aligns, even when it hurts. Because there's a cost to staying where you don't belong. And the truth is, your staying was never love. It was survival. It was programming. It was habit. Now it's healing. It's rebirth. It's a return to the self. But as you rise, others will fall into confusion, into grief, into all the feelings they pushed down while you were there to carry the emotional weight. Some will reach out. Some will stay silent. Some will try to guilt you back into the role. But you'll know the difference between love and control, between care and manipulation, between apology and damage control. And you'll choose peace over performance. They'll feel it. All of it. The absence, the void, the unanswered messages, the lack of access to your warmth. And for the first time, they'll have to find themselves without you as a crutch. And maybe that's the gift. Not your return, but the lesson your absence delivers. What you have to understand is this: your departure isn't just felt, it's processed, slowly, painfully, like a wound they never thought they'd have to dress themselves. At first, they might pretend they're unaffected, like you didn't mean that much, like your presence was just ordinary. But silence has a way of unraveling illusions. And once the noise fades, they feel a shift. They notice the empty space where your energy used to live. They begin to reach for the comfort you always provided, only to realize it's gone. They remember how it felt to be seen by you, even when they didn't deserve it. They remember how effortlessly you made space for them, how you anticipated needs they didn't even speak aloud. Now they feel a vacuum. It's in the moments between texts, in the way their victories feel hollow because there's no one to share them with, in the way their shadows feel heavier because there's no longer a light willing to stand beside them. And in those quiet hours, the truth whispers. You were never the problem. You were the balance, the anchor, the quiet stability they mistook for weakness. Carl Jung often warned that what we reject in ourselves will be projected onto others, and that's what happened to you. You became the container for their unhealed parts, the scapegoat, the emotional sponge, the quiet punching bag. They couldn't face themselves, so they turned you into the mirror that must be smashed rather than looked into. But now the mirror is gone, and all that's left is their reflection. Raw, undeniable, and alone. That's when they feel it the most. Not just the absence of your presence, but the presence of your absence. It lingers in their decisions, in their regrets, in the way they replay the last words you spoke, trying to convince themselves you were overreacting until they realized you weren't. You were just done. And here's what they never expected: that you could be gone and still felt everywhere, that you could be silent and still speak volumes, that you could walk away and still change the atmosphere long after the door closed behind you. That's what people don't understand about someone who's learned to love themselves after being broken. When they finally walk away, they don't slam doors. They leave quietly, gracefully, but they never come back the same. Because when someone who's been emotionally responsible for everyone finally decides to be emotionally responsible for themselves, the entire room shifts. Suddenly, all the energy they gave to others is returned to its rightful place. And with that, the people who were dependent on your light start to feel the dark. They may try to fill it quickly, with distractions, with new people, with forced laughter and overposted photos, but the soul knows. The soul remembers the depth that can't be replaced. And some part of them will always wonder, why didn't I protect this? Why didn't I listen? Why did I push away the very thing that anchored me? But that's their work now, because the moment you walked away, the responsibility shifted. You stopped carrying both your healing and theirs. You stopped translating your pain into something they could understand. You stopped making your boundaries polite enough to be palatable. And maybe, for the first time, you started speaking a language they never bothered to learn. The language of self-respect, self-preservation, self-trust, self-love. And that language, it's fluent in silence. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg. It doesn't convince. It just leaves. Not because it doesn't care, but because it finally does. Carl Jung spoke often of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we hide, deny, repress. When you walked away, you forced people to meet their shadow. You showed them by your absence what they never wanted to admit about themselves, that they took you for granted, that they needed you more than they ever said, that they were never prepared for you to stop showing up. But you did. You stopped. Not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when you tried everything else. And that clarity, it's unshakable. You stop explaining. You stop hoping they'll change. You stop waiting for the apology you know will come, because you no longer need it. You've outgrown the version of yourself that needed them to understand. Now you understand yourself. And that's what people feel when you walk away. Not just the loss of your presence, but the emergence of your power. At first, walking away feels like loss, like grief, like tearing your own skin off just to feel free. Because you weren't just leaving them. You were leaving the version of yourself who tolerated too much, who made excuses, who stayed quiet to keep the peace while a storm raged inside you. That version didn't just die easily. It clawed, it begged, it told you to go back, to try again, to fix what couldn't be fixed. But this time, you didn't. You walked. And when you did, something inside you cracked open, not in pain, but in relief. Because for the first time, you weren't abandoning yourself to stay connected to someone else. You were choosing yourself over survival. You were choosing truth over loyalty. You were choosing freedom over familiarity. And yes, it was hard. Brutally hard. Because the people who felt most familiar were often the ones who hurt you the deepest. And walking away from them wasn't just about the relationship. It was about shedding an identity you wore your entire life. Carl Jung said, Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You finally saw the patterns, the cycles, the wounds, and you stopped calling them destiny. You saw the role you played, not in creating the pain, but in staying in it. And you said, no more. But don't be mistaken. This isn't a story of clean breaks and instant healing. There were nights when you questioned everything. Mornings where the silence was too loud. Days where you wondered if maybe you were the problem all along. But those were echoes. Echoes of conditioning. Echoes of voices that were never yours. And with every step away from that pain, those echoes grew quieter. You started to hear yourself again. Not the self they trained you to be. The self you were before the distortion. You remembered what joy felt like without guilt. What boundaries felt like without explanation. What love felt like when it didn't come with anxiety. And slowly, you began to trust that feeling more than the fear. That's when real power begins to bloom. Because the people you left behind, they feel your power too. Not in your presence. In your absence. They see you smiling without them. Thriving without their validation. Creating peace without their chaos. And it stings. Because nothing confuses people more than seeing you whole after they try to break you. They'll question it. They'll question you. They'll try to rewrite the story. She changed. She gave up. She turned cold. But you know the truth. You didn't turn cold. You stopped burning for people who wouldn't light a match for you. You didn't give up. You gave back what was never yours to carry. And you didn't change into someone new. You returned to someone ancient. Someone rooted. Someone who remembers. Because that's what walking away really is. It's not a break. It's a return. To the body. To intuition. To self-respect. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Walking away was the moment you turned inward. And what you found there wasn't emptiness, it was truth. A truth too sacred to keep betraying. And the more you leaned into that truth, the more you began to see that walking away wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The beginning of speaking without fear. Loving without losing yourself. Living without apology. You didn't walk away to hurt anyone. You walked away because you were finally willing to feel everything. And what you felt was the cost of staying. And when that cost becomes too high, there's only one choice left. To rise. Not with anger. Not with blame. With clarity. And clarity is a superpower. Because once you've tasted it, once you've chosen it, you can never go back. You no longer need to be understood. You no longer wait to be chosen. You are the choice. And in the end, that's what they feel the most, not just the loss of you, but the rise of you. The rise they never saw coming. The shock doesn't always come right away. Sometimes it takes weeks, months, even years for the full weight of your departure to settle into the bones of those you left behind. Because what they lost wasn't just a person. They lost a mirror that reflected a version of themselves they could tolerate. A version that made them feel whole, safe, special, even if it was based on illusion. And without that mirror, they begin to see the cracks. They notice the way their other relationships lack depth. They feel the absence of your emotional fluency, your ability to intuit what wasn't said, to hold space where no one else could. They realize that not everyone listens like you did. Not everyone gives like you did. Not everyone sees like you did. But it's more than that. What they really start to feel is the loss of their access. Access to your time, your energy, your care, your forgiveness. And when they can't reach you anymore, not emotionally, mentally, spiritually, they feel powerless in a way they never have before. Because for so long, your presence was their cushion, their fallback, their place of emotional indulgence. Now, that place is closed. The door didn't slam. It didn't lock. It simply disappeared. And that's what unsettles them most. You didn't just leave. They can't even find you in the same way anymore. Not because you can, but because you've changed frequency. Carl Jung once described individuation as a process of becoming the whole person you are meant to be. That's what walking away activates. It isn't just about boundaries, it's about energetic sovereignty. You are no longer on the same level, not in a superior way, but in a separated way, in a healed way, in a this doesn't resonate anymore kind of way. and the people you walked away from. They feel the energetic gap. At first, they'll try to close it, not with growth, but with guilt. It'll test you, bait you, try to drag you back into the old dance, because if they can get a rise out of you, even a negative one, it means you're still playing. But you're not. You're not performing for approval anymore. You're not leaking your energy trying to fix what they refuse to own. You're not breaking yourself into pieces just to make them feel whole. You proclaimed the self you gave away in little pieces over years of self-abandonment. And that reclamation, it radiates. People feel it even if they don't understand it. Even if they never say it. Your energy is different. Still, solid, rooted. You no longer seek permission to take up space. And that, for some people, is deeply confronting. Because they can't manipulate someone who knows who they are. They can't guilt someone who's made peace with their choices. They can't shame someone who's already walked through the fire of self-examination and came out carrying only truth. And so they retreat. They create distance. They tell themselves stories to feel better. They rewrite history so they don't have to face what really happened. And that's okay. Because your healing was never meant to make others comfortable. It was meant to set you free. And as you walk further into your freedom, you begin to see the world differently. You're no longer drawn to chaos. No longer addicted to being needed. No longer chasing the thrill of potential. You start to value peace over performance. Depth over drama. Truth over attention. You no longer settle for half love or half truths. Because you felt what it's like to lose yourself in the pursuit of being enough. And now you've remembered. You were always enough. You just forgot because someone else benefited from your amnesia. But the remembering changes everything. You walk differently. You speak with intention. You choose yourself, not in defiance, but in devotion. You no longer need to be everything for everyone. You're finally okay being everything for yourself. And when people feel that, they respond. Some with admiration. Some with resentment. Some with silence. But regardless of the response, your truth stays intact. Because the days of self-betrayal are over. You no longer stay out of guilt. You no longer explain your no. You no longer carry what was never yours to hold. Carl Jung taught that the greatest tragedy is when the individual lives for the collective without ever knowing who they really are. When you walked away, you reversed that tragedy. You stepped into your own story. And by doing so, you gave others permission, whether they take it or not, to do the same. After the echoes die down, after the guilt, the doubt, the tug-of-war inside you finally loses steam, something quiet emerges. Stillness. Not the kind that feels empty. The kind that feels sacred. The kind that whispers, this is what peace actually feels like. No tension in your chest. No second-guessing every message. No walking on eggshells just to keep the dynamic alive. And in that stillness, you meet yourself again. Not the version of you they needed. Not the caretaker. Not the peacemaker. Not the emotional crutch. You. The one who existed before the roles. Before the masks. Before the bending, twisting, and shrinking. You start to hear your own voice again. Not as a whisper drowned out by others, but as a clear, undeniable tone that says, I'm still here. Carl Jung believed that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration. And this is what integration feels like. You no longer dissound the parts of you that were too loud, too sensitive, too intense. Now you honor them. You stop apologizing for your intuition. You stop minimizing your needs. You stop trying to be low maintenance just to be accepted. And in that self-acceptance, people start to see you differently. Because the truth is, you walking away didn't just shift how they saw you. It shifted how you saw yourself. You realize that your compassion isn't weakness. It's your superpower. That your sensitivity isn't a flaw. It's your compass. That your silence wasn't approval. It was exhaustion. And as you rise, your standards rise with you. You stop entertaining conversations that drain you. You stop tolerating dynamics that confuse love with control. You stop proving your worth to people committed to misunderstanding you. And it feels so foreign at first, this level of clarity, this sense of, I don't have to suffer to prove anything. But then it feels like home. Because the world you're building now, it's built on truth, on reciprocity, on resonance. You begin to attract differently. Not because you're more desirable, but because you're more aligned, more discerning, more intentional. And the ones who enter your life now, they feel it. They feel the depth. They feel the calm. They feel the boundaries not as walls, but as invitations to rise. You no longer settle for potential. You wait for proof. You no longer play therapist to people unwilling to do the work. You hold space only for those who respect the space. Because walking away wasn't just about removing others. It was about returning to center. That center becomes your new home. Not a place of defense, but of rootedness. Not a place of scarcity, but of abundance. Because you finally realize the love you were begging for, you can give it to yourself. The understanding you longed for, you've cultivated it inside. The peace you kept chasing in others, you carry it now. And what people feel when you walk away and then rise. They feel the change. They may not say it. They may not understand it. But they feel it. In the way you move. In the way you speak. In the way you no longer chase, explain, or beg. There's a quiet confidence in you now. Not arrogance. Not ego. Just certainty. You're not the same. Not because time passed, but because you passed through fire and came out gold. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That's what walking away gave you. Not just peace, not just healing, but the privilege of becoming. And that version of you, the one who knows her worth, owns his space, honors their soul, that version can't be touched. Eventually, they stop expecting you to come back, not because they no longer miss you, but because they finally understand you're not coming back. Not as the version of you they once knew. Not as the person they could mold, hilt, or manipulate. Not as the one who bent to keep things from breaking, because something did break, but not you. It was the illusion that you would always be available, that your love was infinite, unconditional, and self-erasing, that your empathy would override your self-respect. That's the thing about people who are emotionally generous. We give so much for so long, people begin to expect it. And when you finally walk away, it feels like betrayal to them, because they had grown used to your capacity, not realizing your capacity was never obligation. And now the silence you leave behind is loud. It disrupts their patterns. It messes with their control. It removes the safety net they never thanked you for. They feel the distance. They feel the closure that never came in the form they wanted. They feel your absence in rooms you no longer enter, in conversations you'll never respond to. And for some, it becomes a slow unraveling, because they start to wonder, was I wrong? Did I push too far? Did I take too much? For others, the lesson never lands. They replace you quickly. Pretend your presence wasn't rare. Convince themselves you were too emotional, too complex, too much. But the soul always knows. Because once you've been loved deeply, seen completely by someone grounded in truth and compassion, you don't forget it. And most won't find it again. Not because people like you are rare, but because most people aren't willing to become what's required to keep that kind of love. Carl Jung wrote, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And you're walking away. It forced that confrontation. You became the wake-up call they never expected. Not because you were dramatic, but because you were decisive. You didn't throw a tantrum. You didn't seek revenge. You didn't wish them harm. You just walked. Away from the cycles. Away from the inconsistency. Away from the constant negotiating of your worth. And as you walked, something strange happened. People watched. They saw you reclaiming yourself. Rebuilding your peace. Rewriting your narrative. Some admired it. Some resented it. Some feared it. Because when you rise, you expose what others refuse to face. That staying small is always a choice. That self-abandonment was never the requirement. That playing the role of the fixer, the giver, the emotional laborer, it wasn't noble, it was survival. And you don't live in survival anymore. Now you live in sovereignty, where your boundaries aren't fences, they're invitations. Where your silence isn't avoidance, it's protection. where your love is no longer currency, as a gift. And you don't hand that gift to just anyone. You become selective, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Because you know what your energy costs now. You know what it's like to pour endlessly and still be left empty. You know what it's like to love people who only see your value when it's gone. So you don't do that anymore. You don't explain your distance. You don't chase closure. You don't dilute your truth. You embody it. And when people feel that, it changes them, whether they admit it or not. You become the one that got away, not romantically, but energetically. Because you represent what they couldn't hold, what they weren't ready for, what they may never become. And it haunts them. Not in a bitter way, but in a quietly devastating way. Because they realize you didn't just leave, you leveled up. And that kind of departure, it doesn't just hurt, it humbles. Time moves forward, the noise fades, the emotions settle, the world continues spinning. And yet, your absence lingers, not because they haven't moved on, but because something deeper remains unspoken. It's the realization that you weren't just a person in their life. You were a turning point, a mirror, a moment in time that split everything into before you and after you. Because when someone shows you a level of presence, honesty, and emotional clarity that you've never known, it doesn't fade. It marks you. Even if they never say it, even if they try to forget, something inside them remembers. The feeling of being truly seen. The feeling of being loved without control. The feeling of being understood, even when they couldn't understand themselves. That's what people really feel when you walk away. Not just the absence of your body, but the absence of your light, your steadiness, your capacity to hold space in a world that constantly avoids death. And over time, something even more surprising happens. You begin to feel something different too. Not guilt, not regret, not resentment, but gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that woke you up. Gratitude for the truth that broke you open. Gratitude for the version of you that finally said enough. Because the further you walk away from what wasn't love, the closer you get to real love. Not the performative kind, not the anxious kind, not the kind that keeps score or wears a mask, but love rooted in truth. Love grounded in freedom. Love that chooses you, not because it needs you, but because it sees you. You meet people who don't ask you to shrink, who don't get intimidated by your clarity, who don't call you too much when you simply speak the language of death. You discover friendships that hold your boundaries with respect, connections that feel like coming home, not a battlefield, experiences that nourish you instead of depleting you. And you realize this was the point all along. Walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of learning how to love yourself like no one else ever did. The beginning of understanding that self-respect isn't cold, it's holy. The beginning of becoming the version of yourself you were always meant to be. And for those who feel your absence, it becomes their turning point too. Some will rise. They'll look at their own patterns. They'll finally do the work they avoided when they had access to your softness. Others won't. They'll stay where they are, repeating the same dynamics with different people, wondering why it always ends the same. But you'll keep walking. Not away from people, but toward yourself. Carl Jung said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." You've awakened. To your worth. To your depth. To the divine responsibility of protecting your peace. And in that awakening, you become something sacred. Untouchable by anything that doesn't come in truth. Unreachable by anyone who refuses to meet you in wholeness. Unapologetic about the love you give and the love you no longer beg for. That is a power of walking away. It's not a gesture of anger. It's not an act of war. It's the deepest expression of self-honor. It's the moment your soul says, "This isn't where the story ends, it's where I begin again." And what people feel when you walk away. They feel the shift. They feel a loss. They feel the invitation, one they may never accept, but one they'll never forget. Because in a world that tells you to stay quiet, stay small, stay grateful for crumbs, you walked. And in doing so, you became something unstoppable. whole. So now that you've walked this path with me, through silence, heartbreak, liberation, and finally self-return, I want you to pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself one question. What are you still holding on to that you already know it's time to walk away from? Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's a pattern. Maybe it's a version of yourself that served you once, but now keeps you small. Carl Jung believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. What if this moment right here, right now, is the beginning of your awakening? Not a dramatic shift. Not a sudden, explosive transformation, but a quiet decision. The decision to no longer carry what isn't yours. The decision to no longer shrink to be loved. The decision to no longer participate in dynamics where your value has to be proven. Because here's the truth. You are not too much. You are not too sensitive. You are not too complicated. You are simply not meant to be tolerated. You're meant to be cherished. And if anything in your life makes you forget that, it's time to remember. If this video stirred something in you, if it made you feel seen, called out, or even uncomfortable, I want to invite you into something deeper. Not just another video, not just another scroll through content, but a moment of ownership. Because healing isn't passive. It isn't intellectual. It's raw, it's real, and it's yours. Reflect, not just casually. Sit with what this brought up. Ask yourself, where have I abandoned myself to keep the peace? Where have I stayed too long just to avoid someone else's discomfort? Write it down. No edits, no filters. You deserve to hear your own truth uncensored. Share this video. Not because it helps me, but because you know someone who needs to hear it. We all know someone stuck in the loop. Someone who gives too much. Someone who thinks leaving makes them the villain. Send this to them. Be the mirror they didn't know they needed. You might just be the reason they finally remember their worth. Subscribe if this spoke to you, because this is more than content. This is a community of people who are done living in emotional poverty. If you're ready to go deeper into Jungian psychology, emotional healing, shadow work, and reclaiming your power, this is the place. Here, we don't just talk about walking away. We talk about walking home to yourself. Take the next brave step. Maybe that's journaling tonight instead of numbing out. Maybe it's setting a boundary that terrifies you. Maybe it's finally seeking the therapy, coaching, or support you've been putting off. Whatever your next right step is, take it. Because nothing changes until you do. And I promise you, when you do the inner work, when you start showing up for yourself with the same energy you used to pour into others, you become magnetic. Not because you're chasing anyone, but because you're embodying truth. And truth is irresistible. Leave a comment below. Tell me what this stirred in you. Tell me what you're walking away from. Or tell me what you're walking towards. You never know who needs to see your words. You never know how your story could be someone else's permission slip. And if no one has told you this lately, let me be the first. You're allowed to leave anything that costs you your peace. You're allowed to choose yourself without apology. You're allowed to build a life that feels like you. Not what they wanted. Not what they expected. Not what the world told you was acceptable. But you. Whole. Unshaken. Free. Walking away isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's strength. It's clarity. And sometimes the most powerful thing you'll ever do is simply walk in a different direction. So if this spoke to your soul, stay close. We're not done growing. We're just getting started. You are not alone on this path. Not anymore. Now go, walk with power. Walk with grace. Walk with the unshakable knowing that this time, you're not leaving out of fear. You're walking away in truth. And that changes everything.